Picture this. 13,000 years ago, you're a hunter-gatherer living in a cave in what will someday be called Israel. No supermarkets, no fridges, no delivery apps, just you, your feet aching from a full day of walking, and a small group of people you actually trust, which honestly might be rarer than we realize even now. One day, someone in your group notices something strange. A batch of grain, left sitting in a wet stone bowl a little too long, has started to change. It smells odd. It's bubbling slightly. Something biological is clearly happening to it. Something nobody fully understands yet. And then, against every survival instinct a sensible creature should have, someone decides to taste it anyway. That person might be one of the most quietly important human beings who ever lived. Because whatever happened next, whether it was reckless curiosity or sheer accident, may have nudged humanity down a path that changed everything that followed. Not just celebrations, not just casual drinks after a long week. Everything. Agriculture, religion, written language, the entire shape of human society. So when did people actually start drinking alcohol? And more importantly, why did this even begin? The answer stretches back far further than most people expect, and it doesn't start with humans at all. It starts with monkeys. Let's ask an obvious but important question first. Were human bodies even built to handle alcohol? Most animals that consume ethanol have a rough time. Their organs simply aren't equipped for it. But humans, along with our closest primate relatives, are different. We carry a specific enzyme, ADH4, that lets us break ethanol down with unusual efficiency. Here's the wild part. That enzyme didn't appear when humans invented wine, or even when farming began. It emerged roughly 10 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens, long before Homo erectus, long before anything resembling a modern human existed. This mutation appeared deep in the primate family tree, right around the time our ancestors were shifting from life in the trees to life on the ground, which means our bodies were preparing for a relationship with alcohol millions of years before we ever consciously chose to drink it. A researcher at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley spent decades trying to understand why. His theory has one of the best names in science, the drunken monkey hypothesis. The idea is simple. Ancient primates relied heavily on fruit for calories. And ripe fruit, truly fully ripe fruit, naturally begins to ferment. Wild yeast lands on the surface, breaks down the sugars, and produces alcohol as a byproduct. So for millions of years, whenever a primate found the ripest, sweetest fruit available, it also happened to smell faintly of alcohol. That smell wasn't a warning. It was a signal. This fruit is at peak ripeness, eat it now. Ancestors drawn to that smell found more food, survived longer, and passed that preference on. Over millions of years, natural selection quietly built a taste for alcohol into the primate brain. That's where we're headed in this video. From an accidental primate habit, to the world's oldest known beer, to the empires built on top of it. The drunken monkey hypothesis isn't just an elegant idea sitting in a journal somewhere. Researchers actually went out and tested it. A team studied wild black-handed spider monkeys in Panama, collecting the exact fruit these animals chose to eat and measuring its alcohol content. What they found was that the fruit these monkeys preferred regularly contained somewhere between 1% and 2% alcohol by volume, simply from natural fermentation happening inside the ripening fruit. Then scientists went a step further. They tested urine samples from the same wild monkeys and found byproducts of ethanol breakdown. Solid proof these animals weren't just eating fermented fruit by accident. They were actively metabolizing real alcohol as part of their normal diet. A separate study looked at chimpanzees in the Ivory Coast and found something even more striking. Their typical daily fruit intake could expose them to the equivalent of 1 or 2 human alcoholic drinks worth of ethanol every single day, without the chimps making any deliberate choice about it. It was just built into their ordinary meals. So somewhere in the deep past, Your ancestors were walking around the forest with a mild, constant buzz and had absolutely no idea. The pull toward alcohol, the biological wiring for it, was already fully in place millions of years before any human being intentionally made a drop of it. Now here's where the story shifts. Because eating fermented fruit by accident is one thing. Deliberately choosing to recreate that process is something else entirely. It requires memory. It requires noticing a pattern. This happened last time the grain got wet, and deciding to repeat it on purpose. In other words, it requires something close to early science. So when did humans actually take that leap? The oldest confirmed evidence sits inside a cave in Israel called Rakafet Cave near modern Haifa. It was used as a burial site by the Natufians, a semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer people who lived across the eastern Mediterranean, roughly 15,000 to 11,500 years ago. These weren't primitive people by any stretch. They buried their dead with flowers. They kept domesticated dogs. They were socially and culturally sophisticated. Inside that burial cave, archaeologists found large stone mortars that still held residue after 13,000 years. When researchers analyzed that residue using microscopic starch and plant particle analysis, the conclusion was unmistakable. This wasn't leftover food. This was beer, made through a genuine multi-step brewing process, malting the grain, mashing it, and letting it ferment with wild airborne yeast. A deliberate, technically sophisticated process, 13,000 years old. And here's the detail that should stop you for a second. This predates farming entirely. The Natufians weren't growing crops. They gathered wild grain and chose, on purpose, to turn some of it into beer instead of food. This single discovery fuels one of archaeology's most fascinating ongoing debates. Did humans start farming because they wanted reliable bread? Or because they wanted reliable beer? Think about this from the perspective of a hunter-gatherer. Life was already working reasonably well, moving with the seasons, following food sources, staying flexible. Why would anyone give that up to settle in one place, break up the ground, plant seeds, and then wait months for a harvest? That's a massive gamble. What could possibly make that trade-off worth it? One serious answer: beer. A steady, reliable supply of a calorie-dense, mildly intoxicating drink. One that was often safer than the local water, that could be shared at gatherings, used to honor the dead, and used to mark the changing of seasons. This is the beer before bread hypothesis, most closely associated with archaeologist Brian Hayden, and it remains genuinely controversial. Plenty of archaeologists argue bread came first, and that beer was simply a byproduct of grain processing that already existed for food. But the discovery at the Natufian cave gave this theory real physical weight, because here were people 13,000 years ago brewing beer before agriculture existed anywhere on the planet. What's settled is the timeline. Alcohol clearly predates farming. What's still debated is why farming actually started. Let that sink in for a moment. The oldest known intentional alcohol on Earth wasn't made by farmers or city builders or anyone we'd normally associate with the word civilization. It was made by nomadic cave dwellers as part of honoring their dead. From the very start, alcohol wasn't about entertainment. It was sacred. Let's keep moving through time, because after the Natufians, discoveries start appearing quickly in multiple places at once. Jump forward roughly 4,000 years to around 7,000 BCE, and we land in Jiahu, a Neolithic village in China's Yellow River Valley. Researchers analyzed residue inside ancient pottery jars and found something remarkable: a mixed fermented drink combining rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit, possibly grape as well. 9,000 years old, essentially an ancient cocktail. Around the same era, in what's now the country of Georgia, in a small village called Gadakrili Gora, archaeologists uncovered evidence of wine production dating back roughly 8,000 years. Large clay storage jars still carried the chemical fingerprint of grape fermentation. Currently, the oldest confirmed wine on Earth. Georgia still brews wine the traditional way today, in large buried clay vessels called kvevrì, and Georgians will proudly tell you they invented wine. Honestly, there's no real argument to be made against them. Meanwhile, back at Jiahu, researchers also found pottery containing beer brewed from rice and a grain called Jub's tears, still grown across East Asia today. Even more significant, they discovered the earliest known evidence of mold-based fermentation starters, a technique using specific fungi to break down complex starches before fermentation begins. This method predates any written record of it by thousands of years, and it's the direct ancestor of techniques still used today to make sake, baijiu, and Korean makgeolli. What's genuinely remarkable is that China, Georgia, and the Eastern Mediterranean weren't in contact with each other. They discovered fermentation completely independently, around the same general window of time. This tells us something important. Fermentation isn't a lucky accident that happened once and spread. It's something humans, given grain, fruit, or honey and enough time, will discover again and again everywhere. Now let's talk about the civilization that turned alcohol from a discovery into a full-blown bureaucratic system: Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what's now Iraq. The Sumerians, then the Akkadians, then the Babylonians. This is the region where writing was invented. And, perhaps fittingly, some of the very first written records were about beer. Archaeological evidence from Godin Tepe in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran places beer production in the region as early as 3,500 BCE. Researchers found calcium oxalate, a residue produced during fermentation, crystallized inside ancient clay vessels. The same site also produced the earliest chemically confirmed wine residue in the Near East. But Mesopotamia didn't just drink casually. They built an entire system around it. Sumerian workers received daily rations of beer as a standard part of their pay. Laborers building temples, scribes copying tablets, farmers maintaining irrigation channels, all received beer, tracked with the same careful precision a modern payroll system uses. Ordinary workers might receive around 2 liters a day. Senior officials received more. Even the dead were given beer, apparently, to sustain them on the journey into the afterlife. Beer functioned as currency, as wages, as religion, as medicine, as the entire social fabric. The Sumerians loved it so deeply that they created a goddess specifically for it, Ninkasi, whose name translates roughly to the lady who fills the mouth. She held a major place in the Sumerian pantheon, and her role went far beyond brewing. She represented the civilizing power that fermented grain carried with it. Around 1800 BCE, an anonymous poet composed the Hymn to Ninkasi, one of the most remarkable surviving documents from the ancient world. It's a religious poem, a tribute to a goddess, and, according to many scholars, it also functions as something close to an actual step-by-step brewing recipe, describing malting, baking, soaking, fermenting, and filtering. In 1989, an American brewer named Fritz Maytag, founder of Anchor Brewing in San Francisco, actually attempted to recreate the recipe. It was served at a microbrewers conference, drunk from clay jugs through long straws, just as the Sumerians once did. Nearly 4,000 years after the hymn was written, the recipe still worked. The Babylonians expanded on this further, documenting at least 70 distinct varieties of beer. And in one of history's more amusing legal footnotes, the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest written legal codes, dating to roughly 1754 BCE, includes specific regulations about beer quality and pricing. Water down your beer in ancient Babylon, and the punishment was being thrown into the river. Egypt tells a slightly different version of this same story. Beer and wine were both central to daily and religious life. The workers who built the pyramids, not slaves as decades of research has established, received regular rations of beer and bread as core parts of their diet and pay. Egyptian beer, made mainly from emmer wheat, was thick and nutritious, and in a place where river water could carry disease, a fermented drink was often genuinely the safer option. Wine, meanwhile, was reserved for the elite, for temples, offerings, and the tombs of pharaohs. Archaeologists have found sealed wine jars in royal tombs, labeled not just with the vintage, but with the vineyard and even the name of the winemaker, the world's oldest wine labels, sealed for 3,000 years. Across every one of these cultures, the Natufians, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the early Chinese, the earliest evidence of intentional alcohol production is tied to the same thing: ritual, death, offerings, and the sacred. This pattern shows up everywhere, independently, which suggests it isn't a coincidence. Humans didn't invent alcohol to unwind after a hard day. They shaped it into something used to mark the moments that mattered most: birth, death, harvest, prayer, community. So when did humans first drink alcohol? The biological groundwork was laid 10 million years ago in the primates we share ancestry with. The first deliberate production we can confirm dates back 13,000 years in a burial cave in Israel. And from there, the knowledge spread, independently, almost simultaneously, across China, Georgia, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, eventually connecting an unbroken line from a Neolithic pottery jar to a glass on a table somewhere tonight. We didn't stumble into this relationship with alcohol by accident. In a strange way, we grew toward it, the way a plant leans toward light.